Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as we continue to face enormous economic challenges and uncertainty, I rise to join with others in continuing to express concern about too big to fail, a policy that we saw clearly in a large measure coming out of the 2008 crisis, and a policy which many of us think continues to this day and puts the American taxpayer and the American economy at great risk to this day. This isn't a Republican concern or a Democratic concern. It's not just a conservative concern or a liberal concern. A lot of us on both sides of the aisle have this concern. Good example is a Democratic colleague I've been working closely with on these ideas, Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. We both serve on the banking committee. We disagree on a lot of stuff outside and within the banking committee's jurisdiction, but we do agree on some things too, including real concern about too big to fail institutions and the continuation of the implicit policy of too big to fail. That's why he and I have come together on a number of fronts related to this, including legislation, which we can pass this week before we end this Congress, that would simply authorize a study. It is a study resolution, a study, but an important GAO study about too big to fail and those institutions. The idea is real simple. We would ask the GAO, a clearly nonpartisan, clearly expert entity with a lot of smarts, with a lot of ability to do valid, unbiased research. We would ask them to study whether there is an implicit policy of too big to fail with regard to our largest financial institutions, and if so, what benefits that implicit taxpayer guarantee gives those institutions. And specifically, we'd look at bank holding companies with $500 billion or more of consolidated assets, and would look specifically at three things, among others. First, the favorable pricing of the debt of those institutions, resulting from the perception that those institutions would again be bailed out during times of financial stress as they were in 2008. Second, any favorable funding or economic treatment they receive from increased credit ratings directly resulting from perceived government support. And third, the favorable economic benefit of the 2008 bailouts and existing safety nets of the Federal Reserve and FDIC. Mr. President, I think these questions are very legitimate, and I think having an unbiased academic look at that would be very helpful in terms of our continuing work on these issues. We talk about this and debate this all the time. Wouldn't it be useful to have an unbiased, apolitical expert source look at these questions? Do these big institutions, $500 billion or more in consolidated assets, are they considered too big to fail by the market? And does that perception give them advantages like favorable pricing of debt, like favorable funding or economic treatment from their increased increased credit ratings, et cetera? There's a lot at stake here, and it would be very, very helpful to know factual, unbiased answers to these questions. First of all, there's a whole question of too big to fail continuing to exist. I believe it does, but this would put nonpartisan eyes on the question and give us a good sense of, do we have more work to do if in fact we want to get rid of too big to fail, which we virtually to a person in this chamber profess we want to get rid of. Secondly, to the extent too big to fail continues as a policy and or a perception, is it giving advantages to these institutions, market advantages, market distortions, which, by the way, if they are the winners, they're also by definition have to be losers. Smaller institutions which are at a competitive disadvantage because of these market distortions, because of these advantages that too big to fail gives these mega institutions. So, Mr. President, I would hope that this is pretty much a no-brainer. It's a study, doesn't mandate any action, and it asks valid questions to which getting unbiased answers would be very helpful in our continuing work. That's why Senator Sherrod Brown and I have come together in a bipartisan way to ask these questions. We've developed legislation mandating this GAO study, and we're trying to get what we consider should be very non-controversial legislation passed before the end of the year. Now, as it stands now, Mr. President, we have cleared this legislation on the Republican side. Every Republican member is perfectly willing to let this pass by unanimous consent. That process has just begun on the Democratic side. I would urge all of my colleagues to follow Sherrod Brown's lead and to allow us to ask and get unbiased answers to these very legitimate questions. I urge everyone on that side to clear it themselves, to join us on our side in clearing it so we can pass it through the Senate and get this passed over on the House side, hopefully on the consent calendar, and we're already at work at that. That clearing process will take a little bit of time, but I look forward to coming back and having it cleared by UC. I'll probably ask for a live UC at some appropriate point tonight or tomorrow when everyone has clearly had a chance to look at the study legislation. And I look forward to our coming together, I think, in a very sound way, asking these legitimate questions, asking a non-political expert entity to give us valid answers to these questions so we could move forward with proper policymaking. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back the floor.